Hey, this is Paul. Things are supposed to be fun. There's a Doug Wilson video about the truckers that I really enjoyed. But he had all this these Alinsky rules that he was writing about, and he was basically talking about that protesters who are having fun, you're not gonna beat. And I'm not a protester, but Kurt Jemungle's on with Jordan Peterson. What a treat! I talked with Kurt. Actually, the conversation I had with Kurt really fell apart. He was in and out, and we had technical issues. And so, Kurt, if you ever want to do another one, let me know, and we'll do another one, because that one was sort of a catastrophe. It didn't really work well. But this conversation with Jordan Peterson has a lot of interesting tidbits in it. I don't have a lot of time to get into a lot of it right now. Early on, there's a really good section about truth that at some point I want to get to, but of course there are 10 clips in my mind that I'd really love to get to, and I usually only have time to get to one. Which one rises to the top? One never quite knows, but this one's a pretty good one right here, and something that obviously deals with what a lot of our audience is interested in. So let's jump right in.
Only thought about this recently. I think when atheists call the religious dogmatic, what they truly mean is that you're pantheistic for low-level gods. What I mean is, what you've outlined is something.
Okay, we gotta slow that down, because I mean, in so many ways, these kinds of conversations, they just zip by. So let's listen to them again.
Something like atheists call the religious dogmatic. What they truly mean is that you're pantheistic for low-level gods.
That's such an so when atheists call religious people dogmatic, what they truly mean is that the religious people, are pantheistic for low-level gods. That deserves a lot more unpacking than it's going to get.
What I mean is, what you've outlined is something like this. So let's say you have a hierarchy, and hopefully it's monotheistic in the sense that you're integrated, which no one is, but hopefully.
Okay, he sort of assumes Peterson's definition of sort of evolutionary monotheism that he has from his biblical series.
You're pointing to one God, one source of good.
Okay, one God, understanding God as the source of good. It's a good definition. It's in line with Christianity. In Christianity, God is the source of good.
Okay, then you're like, well, what makes me good? And you keep going down and down and down until you get to extremely micro level actions, such as.
Okay, what makes me good? You go down and down until you get to extremely micro level actions. Actions make you good. Well, actions certainly are part of being good, let's say.
Type this email. I'm typing this email. Why? So that I can get an approval for someone for an interview. Why? So that I can talk and hopefully so.
No, he's dealing with motivation there, but he's a fast talker.
And so on and so on. And I think you've outlined, I'm pretty sure it was you, that it depends on, so which level there's the disruption, that is proportional to the anxiety that you experience. Okay.
That's exactly right, yeah.
So then.
They jumped some steps right there that I didn't follow.
I think we know the neurophysiology of that even.
Okay, so then when someone like Sam Harris calls someone else dogmatic, essentially what they mean is that, why are you getting upset at this level? Why are you holding this to be sacred? So here's another example.
Okay. I'm interpreting that to believe that, and this does make sense, that Sam Harris says someone is dogmatic. They are holding something sacred at the wrong level. I think that's correct. I think that's an issue that I think a lot of the conflict between new atheist types and religious types is that religious types believe in things that new atheist types don't believe work in a very direct sense of causality. And the atheist types get very upset when the religious types try to, through political power, embed those sorts of things into the public realm. Now, there's a huge history there with respect to modernity and assumptions about what is proper and improper in the public space, because this actually goes into the question of knowledge and public knowledge, that the physical layer is the best layer in which to establish public knowledge. That's a nice idea. The problem is that the physical layer, as Jordan Peterson points out to Sam Harris on many occasions, the physical layer has the same interpretive challenge as texts. That's the interpretive challenge that the postmodernists bring out. You see this all over the place. So COVID-19, there's a physical layer, the virus, the materiality of the virus within the dynamics. It's very tiny, so it's hard for us to see. Another one would be the January 6 events in the Capitol. Another one would be the truckers' dispute, or the truckers' revolt, or the truckers' protest in Canada. We continually have this problem of what does it mean, because every physical event is subject to a near infinite number of interpretations, because there are varying levels of analysis with which to see that interpretation. In fact, they talk about this very early in the video. So, in other words, what I hear Kurt saying is that part of the complaint of the atheists is against Christians is that they are holding elements of reality sacred that are that shouldn't be held sacred. And now, in almost every case within the dialogue, neither side has a sufficient grasp on what we even mean by sacred, even though both sides are functionally using things as sacred. An example of this would be going back to the Mosaic Law, where you have this entire ecology of clean and unclean, and that ecology is supposed to establish, when Peterson talked to Joe Rogan and talked about what a culture is, are the set of categories, and then Rationality Rules made a video and said, no, that's not true. A culture is not simply a set of categories, but that's one of the best ways to understand a culture, because within those categories you have that which is sacred and that which is profane and all of those things. And that's exactly what the Mosaic Code was about, in order to establish a culture for Israel to move in, and that culture would, in fact, form Israel into the kind of nation that would be, in theological language, pleasing to God, etc., 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 etc. So I think we've caught up to Kurt Jermungle here, and this isn't even the part of it, because it's Peterson's answer that I thought was quite good.
People who are fundamental in their religious views, so they believe it's literal, what's in the Bible is literal.
Okay, and that we've talked about that word plenty, as has Jonathan Peugeot. Literal is a very bad word. What we're really trying to talk about is a concordism, and Vervaeke has even better words for this, a concordism between a rather flat use of language, simplistic, like cow, my cow, and then if you'd go to my house and you'd look in my backyard, you would see a cow, and you'd say, that's Paul's cow. So my cow is connected to that cow. So it's quite materialistic, it's quite flat, it's physicalistic. And again, part of the reason that after the Enlightenment we focused on the physical layer was because that we had hoped that could simplify, and we could get more concrete with respect to what we were talking about, and we could get on the same page. Now that, in fact, wouldn't be the case. Gosh, now I want to do the truth clip in here, and I can't say the guy's name. He was just on Joe Rogan. He talked about COVID. He had been an Islamist, and BJ Campbell tweeted out a little clip from that with me and David Fuller, and then BJ Campbell wrote a piece on it. And now I'm talking about stuff that isn't on the video, and as Joey reminds me, that's not fair.
I think about is, and even people who think the Bible's entirely metaphorical. If I say, well, what if that's
and this literal metaphorical divide is so works so poorly. Because, as C.S. Lewis nicely lays out in his book Miracles, all language is metaphorical. When I say my cow, I have just moved air sufficient to be picked up by this microphone to go through the wire and be recorded and to be put up to YouTube. And so you hear out of your headphones or out of your speaker, cow, and my cow. I'm getting like Vervaeke with these hand things. My cow. See, what Peterson says in this video about imitation, he's right. And if you watch yourself long enough, you'll see you do it. There's a reason when I was young they called me Little Rev, because I watched my father, and elements of my father I put into myself, just like elements of Vervaeke I have put into myself. I've got John Vervaeke in my hands. John Vervaeke has possessed my hands, even though I don't do any Tai Chi and no martial arts. Maybe someday, if I live closer to John Vervaeke, he'll have to teach me how to use my hands correctly. I grew up in New Jersey where we used our hands to talk, but it was a lot more Italian. And the Dutch, I don't know how the Dutch use their hands to talk. The Dutch do their own strange things. Anyway, I'm distracting myself. Back to the point. I got to go back 3 points. What was the point? Cow, the sound, is associated with a quadruped. I was just working on Romans, quadruped. I'm so ADHD. My apologies. The cow in my backyard is associated with the cow movement of the air that I just made, and the cow word that can go into language on paper. It's all metaphorical. That's what Lewis points out. And especially when you're talking about theoretical or abstract or spiritual things, metaphor is the only language we have. When we talk about the throne of God, C.S. Lewis points out in his book Miracles, are we talking about a decorated chair? Or are we talking about a seat of authority? You might say, well, seat of authority sounds less metaphorical than throne. Does it really? So,
imagine I'm speaking to a fundamentalist. If I say, what if this aspect of the Bible is not meant to be literal, it's metaphorical? They get upset.
And then meant to be. Notice how that just slides right in there. Now I'm doing a I don't know who I'm imitating with my hand at that point. But meant to be, meant by whom? The author? Or, the Bible's a very complex book. Christians have long read the Bible assuming that the author is God. But when Sam Harris imagines that God sat down and wrote the thing, Christian says, no, that's not what we're talking about. In fact, our authorship of the Bible is metaphorical when we say that it is inspired by the Holy Spirit. It doesn't mean that a hand sat down with paper and pen and plopped it down and it floated down to earth and someone found it and needed seeing stones to interpret it. No, that's not what we mean.
Why do you get upset? Why is your belief in God contingent? Should your belief in God be contingent, or should you have faith no matter what?
Okay. Well, I think a Christian would say that our faith is certainly contested and debated, but let's say you are having a fight with a lover. You will be exercised, annoyed, and combative over items that you are very certain about. In fact, that's almost exactly the nature of a fight. That, no, I meant this. No, you did that. Ever have a fight? I've had plenty.
Okay, so then they would say, well, so why does that undermine your belief? To me, faith should be, it shouldn't be so easily undermined. And so in some...
Okay, so faith shouldn't be easy undermined. That's not equivalent to not getting upset or combative or defensive or any of those things, even though I think, Christians should be less so. Point taken. But Earlier, what they talked about was Jordan Peterson's. This mic is a little hot. Earlier, they talked about Jordan Peterson's point about depth, which I thought was quite interesting too. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this video.
Sense, it's as if they're saying, "Here is my God," instead of at the top level.
Well, here, what? Oh, yeah, they are. Well, here, okay. Well, so let's dig into that a little bit. That's a very good observation. Well,
it was a fun little passage there.
One of their unrecognized gods is literal, the phrase itself, because literal means real.
Right. And this is the big point that Peugeot and I have been making for a long time, that they're hung up on this word, literal, because they're saying literal means real. And right here, Peterson says what I have been saying for a long time, and I had a little party all by myself in my office when I heard him say this.
And it means ultimately real. But literal doesn't mean real or ultimately real necessarily. Like literal is really, like, what does a Dostoevsky novel literally mean? Well, nothing. Well, none of it's...
See, and if you think about literal, well, let's play with that word a little bit. Let's say, what does it mean literarily? Now, some people will say, no, literarily is opposite literal, because again, when they say literal, they think physical concordism. Literarily, you might say, well, that pertains to the narrative. Now we're getting somewhere, because your assumption, your committedness, let's say, to certain passages of the Bible that are in dispute in terms of their physical concordism, let's perhaps say the stories in Genesis 2, 3, and even 4, we'll take it to Cain and Abel, or let's say Noah and the great fish, because in Hebrew, it's a great fish. It's not a whale. They didn't have a category of a whale. They didn't have a mammalian category with a blowhole and speaking for the krills or anything like that. It was a great fish in the Hebrew. But narratively, well, now suddenly when we say it that way, we say, because the issue, of course, in the modernist fundamentalist fight, where a lot of this got a lot of heat in the late 19th, early 20th century, was basically all about whether these narratives can be relied upon to yield what they represent themselves to be. And again, this is all in C.S. Lewis's book, Miracles.
True. It didn't happen. Or did it? Or did it really happen?
So, and this is a point Peterson makes often. How true is a novel? What, in fact, is a novel? Is a novel an abstraction of all sorts of physical dynamics, and not just physical, but emotional, experiential, narratival dynamics, all brought up into something?
At a meta level. Well, that's where great novels happen, is at a meta level. So truth is complicated. And this is, so the fundamentalists, they're tripped up philosophically to some degree, because they can't see how something can be, oh my God, it's so complicated. This is where Sam Harris and I kept going off on, different tangents.
Jordan, it wasn't your fault. It was not your fault. It's Sam Harris has a problem.
They don't know what they mean when they say literal. They equate literal with real. They equate real with material real. And so when you go after that and you say, well, it's not literally true, what you're essentially saying is that, well, your whole belief system is predicated on a misapprehension.
Yes. Now I may depart in peace. Not really.
Even about the nature of God, let's say. I mean, most religious traditions, or many religious traditions, insist that representing God in a concrete manner is actually an error. The Taoists are not very happy with that idea. The Muslims certainly aren't. The Orthodox Christians really don't, many of them.
The Jews or the Christians,
really don't like to represent God the Father in their iconography. And part of the reason for that is that you shouldn't concretize the absolute. It's dangerous.
See, and there is, I think he's a little wrong, because in Christian theology, we are the image of God. Humanity, we are made in God's image. And so God is concretized and instantiated, but each instantiation is a reduction. So you can't equate me with God, because I am not sufficient. And the reason that you get in the Ten Commandments, you shall not make a graven image of any likeness in all of creation. I'm working on Romans 1:18 through 24 right now, because I'm doing that in my adult Sunday school class. The reason you can't instantiate God in any single thing within the creation is because it is a reduction, and that reduction is going to lead you astray. And this gets deep into Christian theology. This is part of, you can't even get too absolute with this, though, because, and this gets tricky, because God is allowed to, in a sense, be instantiated in narrative. And that is done authoritatively in his word, logos. And then the logos becomes flesh. And, of course, lots of debate between Jews and Christians and Muslims about, and even with our friend Sam, our local Unitarian evangelical heretic. Sam, don't you love it when I mention you in my video, Sam? Grimm loves it a lot. Where's the love, Sam? Where's the love? So that's where these atheist Christian debates often run into problems. God number one, God number two, because God then gets conceptualized by the atheists as a super thing in the sky. It could be a flying spaghetti monster, Cthulhu, you name it, Zeus. And back to all the videos that we've talked about, that is not the Hebrew conceptualization of God. Go back to Ezekiel Kaufman, that God cannot be instantiated fully, but now then Christians go ahead and say, except in Jesus. And quite rightly, everyone says, whoa, wait a minute. And in fact, a lot of the New Testament records that struggle right there of, okay, we just got it into our heads that we cannot ourselves instantiate God into an image. And in fact, of course, the Jews are so careful with this. They're so circumspect with it. They won't even say G-O-D. They'll say Hashem, but then you've just swapped out a word. Okay. But then Christians come and say, but in Christ, and on and on and on we go. Not going to solve that in this video.
Now, it's a problem, because if you don't concretize it, you can't act it out. So there's a tension. But, when people ask me if I believe in God, and I always think, well, there's a whole bunch of assumptions in that question that you want me to swallow so that you can categorize my answer according to your pre-existent schemas. And that isn't an answer they like. But It's an equation, right? Is God real? God real? Well, what do you mean by real? Right. Well, you know what I mean. No, I don't.
No,
do you mean real like a table? Well,
yeah, and I don't think they know
real
what they mean
like the
by
table? They don't know. They just think they know. It's just like the helicopter issue. It's like, do you mean the table? Do you mean the table you know? Do you mean your table? Do you mean tables in general as real? Do they have to have 4 legs? Do they have to have a hard top?
And here again is the rationale, or at least a rationale, behind the commandment, because all of those things have difficulty. And so any attempt to instantiate God as a table, as a little figurine, as any of this, has that difficulty.
What are we talking about when we mean real? Do we mean objectively real, like a table? Well, God isn't like a table.
And in fact, God is reality itself. He is the source of reality that he shares with us and that we participate. John Vervaeke, you have colonized my hand. I do this stuff all the time now.
Well, then he isn't real. It's like, okay, well, have it your way, if that's as far as your thinking goes. But I don't even think that sophisticated religious people, whether they know it or not, don't think that God is real like a table. And as you already pointed out with your discussion about your cup, even what exactly constitutes a table is subject to great. So
it's not obvious.
Look, one of the most impressive thinkers I ever encountered in the field of perception wrote this book called An Ecological Approach to Visual Perception. And he would say that a table is a...
He covered this with Sam Harris. It's Gibson.
I always forget his name. It's An Ecological Approach to Visual Perception. Gibson, yes. Okay, so when you see a table, do you see a flat surface with 4 legs? Or do you see a sitting down to eat place? And the answer is you see a...
And of course, now I've got Vervaeke playing in my head, grasping the water bottle. See, I've got a good memory for this stuff, but it inhabits me.
Sitting down to eat place, and there are objects that slot into that category. That's the answer. It's not the other way around. You don't see the material object, which is self-evident, and infer the function. Now, it may be a combination of those two things as well, but it doesn't matter. The functional element of it has a certain perceptual primacy. And I'll give you a kind of a nifty example of this. There is a neurological condition called utilization behavior, which accompanies prefrontal damage.
And he talked about this with Sam too.
And if ants see a cup, they'll lift it up and drink from it, because a cup is a lifting up and drinking thing perceptually. It grips their motor output. They can't inhibit it. But the fact that they have to inhibit it shows how low level the functional perception is, right? And and that's part of what I was trying to lay out with Harris, is that, the idea that the most real is the objective doesn't seem to be true.
And again, objective isn't the best word there by any means either. The most real is the physical. And that can't be true, as Peterson just pointed out. The most real is not the physical. Now, there is, and this is where if you go back to the Four Horsemen video, you get into this. Part of the reason that Vervaeke is into Neoplatonism, I think, is because we don't quite know what to do with levels of participation of reality. Now, a lot of that is not too hard to think about. For example, this real cell phone stand has a level of participation in reality that is pretty significant. In some ways, this stand is more real than, let's say, I went to bed right when Russia was attacking Ukraine. So, of course, this morning I had all these dreams, which I woke up and it's like, I shouldn't have gone to bed thinking about Russia attacking Ukraine and having, thinking those thoughts, because when I think about the shape of the dreams that I had, it's like, that's what I thought about when I went to bed. Anyway, is this more or less real than my dream? Well, it's very easy to say this is more real. It's more durable. In fact, if I sit down and really try hard to remember a lot of my dream, I can remember part of my dream. It's like the floor of the church was a swimming pool and there were cracks in it and it was falling apart and there were I've had similar dreams to this. It's probably not just Ukraine, but anxieties about my church and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a degree to which that this cell phone stand is more real than my dreams. But I have had some dreams that are more real than this stand. Well, what on earth do I mean by that? I've had some dreams that were expressed the pattern of my life in a durable, I would say even authoritative way. And those dreams are more real than my cell phone stand because I am actually bringing into reality this video and all of my videos because of a couple of dreams that I've had decades ago. Dreams that I had which were different from my other dreams. Dreams that I believed were telling me something I couldn't fully understand about my life. Now, some of you are going to start asking me about these dreams, and I might not tell you. But the further my video odyssey goes and the more things unfold in my life, the more those dreams seem to be coming true in my life and in this world and governing the material arrangements of this world as we move forward in time. In other words, and you've got, let's say, something similar to, he used a Dostoevsky novel. I have copies of Dostoevsky's novels in paper. I have copies of Dostoevsky's novels in Kindle. I have audiobooks of Dostoevsky's novel on my cell phone and in my library. Where does the novel reside? What is most true? Let's think about Jonah and the great fish. Obviously, there's interesting conversations to be had about that story and a physical story with the prophet Jonah and a certain trip to Nineveh and a certain going away to Tarshish and. Well, in other words, simply judging reality in terms of materiality alone isn't a good indicator. Yet it's not a bad one because, of course, in the Christian story, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the Gospels take pains to represent the resurrected Jesus as material. But then in terms of how he acts out, he is more than material. Now, there was an engineer at one point who had an idea for a cell phone stand and, probably pretty much had this shape in mind. And then at some point decided to put this little gap in. So back in the day, you could plug it in. You could put your wire up there. And the cell phone stand existed in his mind. It existed on a CAD drawing. It existed then in a shop. And then I used to work in a machine shop for one summer during college. And I used to make little stuff like this, little pieces and things, and sit at a drill press and fall asleep because I was bored out of my mind. But all of these things. And so where, in fact, is this cell phone stand? So real is a very, very difficult thing to talk about. And it's perhaps in many ways what we're always talking about is the so how old I am, is the Russian invasion of Ukraine real? Oh, it's very real indeed. But what is it? Well, that's not an easy thing to answer. There's a lot we can say about that. So, and when it comes to religion and the Bible, those stories are real enough to shape human history. That's a pretty real thing. That's a very real thing. And when Peterson says things like it's the foundation of Western civilization, or you ignore the Bible at your peril, you're saying it is very real indeed. So they're gonna break here in a minute, I think.
for our perceptions. And then that tangles us up scientifically, right? Because if our perceptions evolved and we evolved to adapt to reality, and we don't see objects as the fundamental perceptual reality, then what does that say about reality?
And I'm gonna my hand's doing the Vervaeke thing again. It's the back and forth. It's the back and forth. Let's use the Peugeotian, both brothers. It's the heaven and earth. It's the back and forth. It's the weaving back and forth. That's what we're doing.
And that's not, the answer to that question is not bloody obvious. Mm-hmm. Well, that's another question I hope that I can get to with Dawkins, you know. And maybe he knows something that I don't. God, I hope so.
Anyway, I didn't have a lot of time to make this video, but I wanted to make something, and I wanted to get it out there, and I wanted to recommend, Kurt Jamungal. I haven't had anywhere near enough time to look at all of the work that he's been doing. He's put out a ton of stuff, and I think he's done a terrific job at it. I know he had a lot of time with Vervaeke and Bernard Castro, and he's had whole ranges of guys on his channel, and he's, a lot of people try to, I'm not exactly sure. I think Kurt probably is doing something similar to myself in wanting to learn, and that's behind his channel. Some people just want a job, and so they get all these high status people onto their channel and get the interviews, and that's doing us all a favor in many ways. But I get the sense that Kurt is keeping up with the conversations and wanting to learn and participate in it. So I think it's a good thing. So I've next week in the Christian Reformed Church, we have a thing called classis. And twice a year, some classes 3 times a year, we get together with all the regional churches, and we have business to do. And I am not only a delegate to my local classis, my regional classis, because I'm a pastor of a church here, but I'm also a synodical deputy, which means that I have to, on certain occasions, visit other classes to make sure that they are doing things decently in good order. And a whole bunch of that stuff happens the first week of March. So I'm trying to stockpile some videos so that the channel doesn't lie fallow. I might try making some more videos on the run. I've got to make a little trip to Salt Lake City, and I'm not going to have time to do anything else. I'm flying in the evening. I have a meeting that next morning, and then I fly right out. And I've got a sermon to get ready on Sunday. So there's so many good videos out there to talk about. We have an abundance of blessings in this world. So, yeah, and my prayers are with the people of Ukraine. Thought about making a video about that this morning because yeah. So anyway, there's this, and watch Kurt Jamungal and Jordan Peterson. It's a little bit of the conversation's a little bit here and there, but there are some good nuggets along the way. And again, early in the video, when they start talking about truth and lying, that was a really good section. And I wanted to use that with some sections from Joe Rogan and Mazar. What is his name? Shoot. It's amazing how names work. Anyway, so I'm wasting your time now. So leave a comment.